So together we pray, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself, and the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire, and I know that if I do this with you, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, will I trust you always. Though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Our key presenter of the night is Dr. Bob McCarty. I personally first met Bob McCarty during my Leadership in the Christian Community class at St. John's University, Collegeville, Minnesota, circa 2007-8, I believe that was, Bob. But during that time, he was serving as the executive director of the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry. And before he has since retired from that role and currently serves as adjunct faculty at the Catholic University of America and the University of Dallas, offers retreats, workshops, and training programs in ministry skills and issues internationally, and assists parishes and ministry organizations in pastoral strategic planning. Bob served as the project coordinator for the St. Mary's Press research project, Going, Going, Gone, the Dynamics of Disaffiliation in Young Catholics. He's a published author, one of those being most recent books being Faith Talk, Having Conversations with Young People That Matter. Bob is a volunteer in his parish youth ministry and catechetical program at St. Francis of Assisi Parish in Fulton, Maryland. Bob has a doctorate in ministry from the Graduate Theological Foundation in Indiana, and a master's in religious education from LaSalle University. That said, I give you Bob. Go for it.
Thank you very much. And folks, thank you for inviting me into your various parishes via Zoom. This is probably one of the best uses of technology. I mean, for everything that people say about technology, I think the way that the church has harnessed technology for these kinds of formation experiences, I think this is a big deal. And having been a youth ministry volunteer all through COVID, oh Lord, thank you for Zoom. And so there's probably a patron saint for media out there. I just wish I knew who it was. But there we are. All right, so folks, I think this workshop for tonight is so incredibly practical and useful. And in fact, at the end of the night, I'll be talking about 3 different sets of skills that we should be using. You can use them immediately, and you'll see when we get to that. Just as an FYI, I did send John a 3-page handout for tonight, and John's going to post that or has posted it on the website. Did I get that right, John?
Correct. They're posted on the website. I'm going to drop that in the chat as well for quick reference.
Okay. All right. So let me just set up the PowerPoint first and make sure everybody can see it correctly. So John, can you see that? Is everything okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. So so folks, I've been in youth ministry a very, very long time, and I've been really concerned about our approach to self-esteem. I think everybody in ministry, whether you're in religious ed or youth ministry, any of those ministries, school ministry, dealing with young people, dealing with children, we all have that concern about self-esteem, but exactly what it is and how and what can we do that really fosters a healthy self-esteem? I think that's a critical question. So that's what we're going to be looking at. But I want to set the stage this way. See if this sounds like any of your young people. Here's the quote. Our youth love luxury. They have bad manners. They have contempt for authority. They show disrespect for their elders, and they love to talk instead of exercise. Children are now the tyrants and not the servants of their households. They no longer enter the room. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents. They chatter before company, gobble up their food, and tyrannize their teachers. That's from Socrates, 400 BCE. There are some things about young people that are just certainly timeless. But I do think our young people today are dealing with issues that are very specific to adolescence in our era. I think in the post-COVID era, all the research is looking at the rise in depression, anxiety, stress, and suicide among our young people. There's something else going on. All this is compounded by what I would call the normal developmental issues. Maybe you can remember back to being that early adolescent. And my favorite definition of adolescence begins about age 11 and it goes until you recover. And some of you are recovering adolescents and you know who you are. All right, so it's because I can't see you, you're making all kinds of comments, and that's why I know that indeed you get what I'm saying. But think about that time of adolescence. I call it the era of explosions. These poor kids, first off, their bodies explode. Can you remember when your body felt out of control, that all of a sudden you were maturing, and the kids are so afraid of being too tall or too short, too heavy or too thin. They're afraid of being too much the same and too different from their peers. Their bodies explode. Their emotions explode. Parents know this. Parents know what it's like when your kid wakes up in the morning and you say good morning and they go, huh? What do you mean by that? Where they break into tears at all these odd times. It's like, and they don't even know what's going on. So their emotions are out of control. I think it's when their values are up in the air. They're trying to form their value system. And on top of that, because God has a sense of humor, that's when their sexuality blossoms. Okay, I think it explodes. It's like all of a sudden, I can remember as I was going to say a 13-year-old, but it's probably, I can remember 13 years old, girls were girls, and then something happened, and all of a sudden it was like girls were girls. Something goes on in the middle of those explosions. How can kids possibly have a healthy, how can they possibly like themselves in the middle of all the explosions? And I think that's where we come in. I think we can have great impact at that part of our young people's lives. And so here's what I'm going to ask you. Just think about this for a second. You hear the term self-esteem. What do you think it means? So what would you say about that? Think back when you were younger. Can you recall what was it that enhanced your self-esteem? And what was it that lessened your self-esteem? And if you have an easy answer, just turn to the person next to you and say, here's what I remember when I was younger. Here's what helped me. Here's when I was younger. Here's what lessened my sense of self. But a lot of this has to do with how we understand self-esteem. And so here's what I want to build on for a second. When I think about this whole issue around self-esteem, I want to frame it in terms of what I think are the 5 hungers of young people. Now, I made this up, but because it's in PowerPoint, it must be true. I've been thinking about this for a long time with young people. I think there are these 5 hungers that shape their lives, and I think it even shapes their religious identity. First is the sense of meaning and purpose. I think our kids are hungry for a sense of meaning. They try to make sense out of the world, out of their lives. It's questions like, what will I be when I grow up? Does God have a plan for me? Is there a work I'm supposed to do? How do you make sense out of the chaos of their personal world and the global world? And I think they're hungry for that sense of meaning. They're hungry for a sense of connection and belonging. They want to belong somewhere. And I'm going to come back to that as a big impact on their self-esteem. They want to belong somewhere. The third is they want to be recognized. They want to be recognized as individuals having a gift to share with others. I think they want to be recognized as having something to bring to the table. I think they hunger for that kind of an affirmation, and I'm going to come back to that one as well. The fourth is sometimes the least obvious, but I think our young people have a hunger for justice. I think from their earliest ages, and the parents in this Zoom, I think you'll probably remember this. It's like kids seem to know when things are out of balance, when the goods of the world haven't been equitably distributed. What the kids say, it's not fair. Now, I don't think every time a kid says it's not fair, it's an issue of justice, but I do think it means at early ages, they pay attention. And I think they want the world to be fair. I have found out one of the most profound experiences in youth ministry is young people involved in service and justice immersion experiences. And when you attach that to the gospel and to prayer, I think it's the most powerful experience our young people have in our ministry. And then the fifth, and it flows right in, I think there's the hunger for the holy. I do believe in, and even in the midst of all the work I've been doing around disaffiliation, I am convinced there's a hunger for the holy that's imprinted on their soul. I think we spend our whole life trying to reconnect with the Creator, even if we use different kinds of words for it. So the key for us is how do these hungers play into an approach and an understanding of self-esteem? And so I want to frame it this way. I want to look at this idea of self-esteem in this positive sense first. And it's called positive youth development. And this comes mostly from the work of Search Institute out of Minneapolis. But look at the definition here. It's where adolescents actively seek and they're assisted in meeting their basic needs. And this last part is the critical one, building their individual assets and competencies. So what the Search Institute found years ago is that in our ministry, part of what we're about is trying to help young people in the terms of their psychological, emotional, relational, spiritual development, helping them to develop their assets and their competencies. And I'll come back to that in a moment. All right, so in that framework then, here's a way of looking at it. Think backbone and scaffolds. So when you look at this little diagram here, the inner part here is their backbone. Think of their psychological, emotional, spiritual, relational backbone that is so critical to who they are. And I believe that when you look at this image through the idea of self-esteem, the question becomes, what are the qualities, the values, the characteristics, the virtues? What do you want our kids to have? So pause for a moment. When you think of your young people, what is it you want them to have? What are the characteristics? What are the qualities that you want young people to have? So a young person who goes through your ministry program, your catechetical, your school program, what are the qualities you want them to have as part of their psychological backbone? Give some thought to that. Kind of track it a bit. Because here's what I found. A nurse friend of mine said that our physical backbone is not fully formed probably until our early 20s. If that's true of our physical backbone, I have to believe it's true of our psychological, emotional, spiritual backbone, which means we are working with our young people at one of the prime moments in their life for developing these healthy values that will become part of their backbone. But here's the other side of that. We're not just developing backbone, we're providing a scaffold. A scaffold is a temporary structure that you erect while you're building something. So using that image, what are the scaffolds that we want in place while our young people are building those backbones? Think of what it is, and I've thought about youth ministry this way. Our goal should be, can we surround our kids with the best possible scaffolds? Can we look at the relationships, the experiences, the networks that should be surrounding our kids? And this is where we come in so personally in terms of the relationships we form with them. So backbone and scaffold. Backbone. What are the values, the characteristics, the qualities, the virtues we want our young people to have? Scaffolds. What do we want in place while they're building that backbone? And so think about it this way. I think youth ministry is a critical scaffold. I think church, obviously, school, obviously, but relationships with caring adults, critically important. Kids involved in sports and sports teams. The team's important, and so is the coach. Kids involved, I think, in Catholic schools and religious education, we also form that scaffold of religion around them or church around them. I think our young people need healthy scaffolds surrounding them as they develop their backbone. I think it's even critically more important now in a post-COVID era when our young people have lost a lot of they lost a lot of the scaffolds, that a lot of them were not able to be maintained during the COVID era. And despite what we might be thinking, I don't think our kids are over it yet. I don't think our young people have fully rebounded from the impact of having those 2 or 3 years of being isolated, especially from the caring relationships in their life. All right, so with that, so think about that as we think about self-esteem. I want to talk about how do you build backbone? How do you provide scaffolds? And I think that fosters a healthy sense of self-esteem. But with that, I want to start with this. I'm going to bet that those of you who tried to figure out how, any of those who tried to answer the question, self-esteem means, I think this is the most popular definition or most common definition is we want our kids to feel good about themselves. Because the image we have is if kids feel good about themselves, then they'll do good. I want to propose that that's the great self-esteem myth. There is no research that correlates high self-esteem with good self-feelings. And in fact, here's my suspicion. Read the paper and think about the unscrupulous athletes, businessmen, politicians, sometimes church leaders. I'm going to bet they felt good about themselves. And yet their actions are so negative, detrimental, and even destructive. So we fall into this trap of thinking that our job is to help kids feel good about themselves. I'm going to propose that that's an affirmation model. It starts with believing that good feelings lead to good behaviors. I think it's a myth. I'm not saying that affirmation is not important, so hold on to that. But I am saying that if that becomes our main focus, I think we're missing something here. So rather than think of it this way, I would propose this. Turn the language around. I've come to believe that if kids, now I know it's not great English or grammar, but if kids do good, they'll feel better about themselves. I have a suspicion that at the heart of healthy self-esteem has to do with young people learning good behaviors, good actions, good competencies. Now, I have a caution here. I'm not talking about an achievement model. So when you look at this graph on the PowerPoint, the achievement model, that too is a trap because young people easily fall into, I'm only as good as my grades. I'm only as good as if I start on the team. I'm only as good as I'm the first chair in the band. I have the lead in the school play. When self-esteem gets attached to achievements, the danger is what happens when those achievements aren't there anymore? What happens when my grades start to slip? What happens if I don't make the team? I don't get in the band. I'm not the star of the school play. So I'm trying to avoid that, and I want to avoid that specifically because oftentimes for parents this becomes their model because this is observable and measurable. And that's the problem around this whole issue of self-esteem. We look for things that are measurable. I remember well volunteering in my parish, and a parent came up and she was so concerned about her son's grades. And she goes, I don't, something must be wrong. His grades just, they're just not, they're not what they used to be. He seems to be slipping. And I had to remind her, I said, I have to tell you, that might be true. But your son is one of the most socially just young people I've ever met. He's so compassionate. He's so concerned about others. But I thought myself, that stuff is not as measurable. So we slide into something easy. We slide into a report card, grades, achievements in school, maybe achievements in youth ministry. And so, but do you see how those kinds of achievements are fleeting? I would rather propose what I call a competence model. A competence model says, let's teach kids the competencies they need to become healthy, caring adults in a complex world. Let's teach our young people the competencies, the skills. Let's help them develop the assets that they will need to be healthy individuals. It will help them do good. And I believe if we do that, then they will feel better about themselves. But I want to anchor it in behavior. In counseling, counselors say that we are more likely to act our way into a new way of thinking than we are to think our way into a new way of acting. So I'm going to propose that in ministry with young people today, children, middle school, high school, and beyond, I think the task here is to help our kids develop the life skills, the competencies that help them do good. And I think that doing good leads to, I do believe this, leads to feeling better about themselves. And there's a way to do this, that's the key here. There's a way, I think, to do this. And so I want to propose this as an overarching image. When I started in youth ministry, Moses and I were having a conversation. Okay, just kidding. Just checking to see if John was listening. All right. So when I started in youth ministry, one of the resources I can remember was this little kind of a monograph called "I Am Lovable and Capable," and it was about a little kid. It's highly illustrated. It's about a little boy who wakes up in the morning. He's got a big sign on his chest, ILAC, I am lovable and capable. And then things start to happen. He's late getting down to breakfast and his cereal is soggy. He finally gets out the door just in time to see the bus going down around the corner. He finally gets to school and he gets there just as the bell rings and he has to go to the office and get a admission slip or a late slip. He gets into class, teacher calls on him, he doesn't know the answer. Every time something negative happens, a little piece of his ILAC sign falls off. He's sitting in class and a girl sitting next to him turns and smiles and says hi. Big part of his sign goes on. I don't think this is a different workshop. I don't think girls quite understand. I'm glad we grow out of this. The power they have just by saying hello to boys and women to men. I thought I would just bring that up. All right, but that's a different workshop. But so the kid goes home, and by the time he gets home, his ILAC sign that was the size of his chest is now the size of a postage stamp. I love those two images of lovable and capable because I think that's at the heart of self-esteem. The lovable part says we accept our kids. This is big on it. Obviously, it's a big part of what we do in ministry. We accept our kids for who they are. We do. That's part of what it means to be Catholic. Here comes everybody. So Catholic Youth Ministry, here comes all of our kids. We accept them because of who they are. We don't accept them because of what they do. It's not because of the sports or the grades, the academics. It's because of who they are. We accept them. And we accept them unconditionally. That doesn't mean we always like all of our kids, but we love our kids and we accept our kids for who they are. It feeds right into their hunger for affirmation, for recognition, and for connection. We respect our kids. And this is a PS. This is a freebie. There's two ways to show respect for our kids. And I found working with young people, sometimes respect is even more important than loving them, because respect kind of gets at the heart of dignity and value. But two ways to show respect for kids. I know this sounds simplistic, but the first one is ask their opinion. I am amazed at how many kids are never asked what they think about anything, from politics to global events to local events to sports. Doesn't matter. When we ask their opinion, we are saying that their opinion is valuable. The second way you show respect for kids, you listen to their answers, even the crazy answers. We listen to their answers. I know that sounds simplistic, but it's not. The number of times after Mass at my parish, being in the gathering space, looking around for our teenagers and where they are, I am amazed sometimes by, I will ask kids questions and the parents will jump in and try to answer the question for them. And I want to smack them and go, shut up. I'm working here. This isn't fun. This is ministry. But I don't know what it is about the parents that they're so afraid that their kids might have the wrong answers. And so ask their opinion, listen to their answers. And then here's the other thing about being lovable. Remember the explosions that are going on. So kids oftentimes don't feel lovable. And in order to feel lovable, it has to be validated in their self-experience. And here's what I mean by that. We might say to a kid, you're a great kid. The problem is that young person doesn't know what being a great kid means. What does great mean? And if I'm coming out of a spot where everything inside me is exploding, I'm not sure I like me. Why would I believe that you like me? And so it has to be validated in their self-experience, which means can we identify what it is about them that is great? And this is a case where you can't lie. You don't do false praise. Kids see through false praise right away. But when we can identify some of their assets, their competencies, their qualities, we can point that out to them. That has incredible weight. And here's why peers have such power. They're connected to their peer group. And so what they're doing, they're pulling away from their family. All right, let me get this right. They're pulling away from their family to get a sense of who they are as individuals. And where do they go? Their peer group, who their lives are exploding the same way our kids' lives are exploding. So it's just a difficult time for them. But when we as adults can see, we can name what it is about them that makes them lovable, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. So it's got to be based in observable behavior. And I'll come back to that again in terms of skill, but it's observable behavior. I'm going to propose that we need to catch our kids doing right, catch our kids doing good, and point that out to them. And the problem is, if we just don't interpret any of that as not having boundaries, because I think we have to have boundaries. But what that means, because love without discipline, without some kind of boundaries, our kids can become very indulgent. I mean, we all know the horror stories, I suspect, I know the stereotype, the helicopter parent, now I hear about the snowplow parent, and now I'm hearing about the drone parent who's always kind of hovering above and kind of watching. My fear is that love without any kind of boundaries, without any kind of discipline, our kids become entitled and spoiled. I think that's a problem. And what happens in a situation like that is they expect everything without working for it. And they don't expect consequences to behavior. So that's that extreme. But the other extreme is dangerous too. Discipline without love is also dangerous. That becomes a punitive relationship. And so we need to balance that whole idea of love and boundaries. I think that's a critical task. but I do think that that's what we do. That's what we do. We provide those kinds of boundaries. And in fact, psychologists would say when these external boundaries that we provide our young people, that's the beginning of conscience because they internalize those boundaries. So you can imagine then what happens with a young person with no boundaries at all. You can almost foreshadow what kind of a young adult, an adult they're going to be if they haven't been able to do that. So the first part of what we're going to do, how do we help our kids feel lovable? The second part is about capable. Capable is about the ability to do things. It's about behavior. It's about identifying the things they do well. And I'm going to propose in a moment, and it is providing kids the kinds of life skills they're going to need to be successful adults down the road. And I believe when we do this right, when we balance that lovable and capable piece, I think what it creates in our young people, and I call it the 2 C's, the confidence and competence. And I think it's cyclic. I don't think one comes before the other. I think it's a circle kind of thing. The more confident our kids feel, the more they're willing to try new things and develop competencies. The more competencies they develop, the more confident they're going to feel in a variety of life situations. Think about the kinds of competencies we're talking about here. Basic ones, like kids making friends. You want to be a little bit more serious? Kids asking for or providing forgiveness for something. Have you ever thought about your own children? It's like, what one skill would you want your own children to have to just make them better children? And as I heard one woman talk about, she goes, if they would just follow directions, if they would just listen, if they would just manage their time, especially kids who are in school, just manage their time. And I remember a parent saying to me, I remember when it was such a big deal when they learned to tie their own shoe, that's a competency, or they learned how to ride a bike. That's a competency. But as they get older, those competencies are much more complex, but no less important. This whole idea of fostering our kids' confidence and competence and what that looks like. And see, and that's why parents often jump into the achievement model, because it's easier to see grades than it is to see goodness, forgiveness, compassion, justice. It's easier to see grades because you get a number for that and you can follow that. So I would say, so for us, my starting point is for kids to do good, they need the skill to do good. And that's what we call character, and that's what we call virtue. This comes right out of our ministry. But the starting point is, how do we provide young people the skills to do good? Because I think as they want to be good, sometimes they just plain don't know how. We have to work. We are part of their scaffold, and we have to build in their backbone, I think, those kinds of social competencies that are critical. I think what we have to pay attention to is life skills training. And what I'm getting at here is this idea of life skills training is providing kids the skills they need to survive in a complex society. And that society is even more complex now. And increasingly, with the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, it's like, I just think they're living in a world that for many of their parents was just not their reality, requiring different kinds of skills. And I think we in youth ministry, I think this is exactly what we do. How do we help provide skills for our young people? How do we help our young people develop the behaviors, the assets, the competencies to survive in this complex world? I think that's what we're trying to do. And I wanted to give an idea of what this might look like. And when I talk about skills, I am talking about observable behavior. And the reason I like this image is because that means the skill becomes repeatable. So we need the skills, and this is why it's important. We need the skills to act how we want to be. So we in church work, we may provide this image vision for what we want our young people to be like. They need the skill to do that. And I'll come back with examples around that. I think skills are inherently related to self-esteem because that's where confidence and competence comes from. And I think skills, behavior is the way that our kids begin to live out their life. They live out their values. So I think that's where we're heading here. Okay, so what kinds of skills are we talking about? Let me just give you a snapshot here. This would be fun. I mean, if we had more time for a day, this would be really fun to just say, what are all the skills we want our kids to have? But think of them in these three arenas. They need skills for, I call them social transactions. It's relationship skills. I think one of the fundamental skills is how to make and keep friends. I think that's a critical skill for younger and younger kids. But things like resolving conflict, things like dealing with adults. For you who are dealing with like sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school and beyond, think about the skill of interviewing for college, interviewing for jobs. Think about the skills that are required for a young person to hold a job. All that is around social transaction. Developing effective plans of action, fundamental. I think decision-making is a fundamental skill that young people learn how to, when they're faced with a choice, a decision, a problem, they can identify alternatives, all the alternative ways of dealing with that, think about the consequences, and then choose the best course of action. That's a skill. That kind of decision-making, that kind of problem solving, that kind of setting goal, that's a skill. It's like the young person who says to you, I can't wait till I'm 16, I get my driver's license and I get a car. And you start to say, who's going to pay for the insurance? Insurance? Who's going to pay for the car? Pay for the car? All right, that whole idea of creating a plan of action. It's the kid who in the senior year says, you ask him, what are you going to do next year? I'm going to go to college. Where have you applied? Apply? See, you get the idea that a skill for our kids is planning for their own future, that kind of effective action. And the third, especially now, this whole idea of dealing with stress and anxiety, we know the research told us just how young people have suffered through the COVID era and the rise in anxiety, stress, and even suicide among our young people. I think that's really pretty incredible. I think it's pretty challenging. So this whole idea of providing skills, I think skills are really a critical piece. And I wanted to give you an example from a variation on scripture about skill. Here's the little parable. It says, maybe you've heard this little story about Adam talking to God in the garden. God said to Adam, I want you to go over and give Eve a little squeeze. And Adam replied, Lord, what's a squeeze? So God explained it to him. And when Adam came back, God said to him, now I want you to go over and give Eve a kiss. Lord, what's a kiss? Asked Adam. So God explained that to him. And finally, God said to Adam, now I want you to go over to Eve and increase and multiply. So Adam went over to Eve, and in a few minutes, he returned to God and asked, God, what's a headache? All right, I'm sorry, that's like a married person's joke. I'll just keep going. All right. Yeah, and we're recording this. This is really great. Okay, so how do you teach skills? What would that start to look like? I'm going to propose this in terms of teaching skills. 3 ways that we can do this. I'm going to propose that we can do this in our personal interaction with our young people. And I want to give you some skills to do that. But second, I'm going to encourage you as people in ministry. How do we begin to infuse skills in our existing programs? What would that start to look like if we could do that well? How do we begin to take our normal programs and can we add something to that relates to skills? All right. So that's the second. And third, and I know nobody has more time, but I am recommending that we might want to think about some new programs or training sessions, a course that teaches skills. And I want to give you an example of that, actually from my own parish. Every spring we do a course called, it's just for the high school seniors. And we took this out of St. Mary's Press. They have a book called Last Things, Lasting Things. And it's a preparation for that transition from high school to college. It's a course. It was like a 3 or 4 session course where kids got to talk about that whole um, transition into college or into the work world, into the military. So that was clear. But I can imagine new courses. I can imagine, for instance, and think about kids' reaction to this. I can imagine doing a whole course on leadership skills that talked about decision making and problem solving, conflict management. I could see young people taking something like that. I mean, it was really at the heart of the course that John and I shared at St. John's in Collegeville. It was all about what are the skills we need to be effective leaders today. I can see young people doing that. I can see kids doing. I can see them doing. Could you imagine doing a course on dating skills? I remember this young person. Oh my God, it was delightful. Junior high school, first prom. He actually asked a girl and she said yes, and he was excited. And I can remember my wife Maggie saying to him, "So, are you going to get her flowers? I have to get her flowers? Yeah. Um, and they're supposed to match her dress. They have to match something? Yeah. And there are different kinds of flowers. Sometimes you can have a bouquet that you hold. There could be a corsage that you pin. There could be a thing you put on your wrist. See, even I don't know that one, but I know it's true." He said, "Oh my God, look, that it's a skill. It's a, all right. This is true. I'm not making this one up. We had a foster kid, Maggie and I, for several years. Uh, Freshman in high school, absolutely delightful. His best skill, he had no fear asking stupid questions, none. And so we went out to a really nice restaurant, and Andy was delightful. And he said to us, he says, "Okay, I know this is stupid, but I have to ask, why do we have so many forks?" Think about it as a social skill. So I told him, I said, you use the big one, and the little ones are souvenirs. All right, Maggie hit me. All right, she corrected me. But think about that. How many times have you been to a formal event and the table is so crowded, you don't know which is your water glass and which is your bread? And have you ever stopped to wait for somebody to start the circle? All right, so here, this is a freebie. I don't think you're going to be able to see this well on Zoom. But if you hold your hands like this, you have a B and a D. The B is your bread plate and the D is your drink. So if you just hold it in front of you, that's how you know. Okay, this is my bread plate and this is my glass over here. It's my drink glass. See, it's a social skill. But the idea, imagine what it does for a young person who has that skill, who is comfortable in social settings. These kids are going to go to proms. They're going to go to dances. They're going to go to weddings. They're going to go to funerals. Yesterday, Maggie and I, my wife and I, were at a funeral for my cousin's wife. Really a sad. I watched the high school kids there, not sure what to do at the funeral. They didn't know about signing in the book, getting in line to see the family, offering a prayer at the casket. And I watched that. That's a social skill. Start to think about what are the kinds of skills we want to be able to teach our kids. Think about things like, if I could do it all over, one of the primary skills I would teach young people is how to dance. If you've ever run a dancing as part of your program, my memory of being in high school was that the boys stood around the wall watching everybody dance, acting too cool, like, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. And every one of them wanted to dance, but no one wanted to be embarrassed. Every one of them wanted to know how to dance. I've always held on to that we should teach our kids how to dance. In my early youth ministry days, we did a senior prom. It was a prom for people over 65. And our kids went to the local retirement community and we brought people in for a prom and we had them dressed up. But the week before that prom, we taught the kids, we brought somebody in to teach our kids how to dance the way these over 65-year-olds would dance. I have to tell you how proud I was of those kids who, when the seniors came in for their prom, our kids were so quick to offer to dance with them. But it's a skill. And so can you imagine doing a skill around dancing? Can you imagine for your kids who are either going off to college, living on their own, or maybe their home situation, teaching them how to cook and how to do laundry? I mean, these are life skills that develop confidence and competence. I think it's a big deal. All right, and so what would it start to look like? How do we start to do this? In our conversation with kids, I find the most effective way of building confidence and competence is effective praise. But pay attention, it's effective praise, not empty praise. Let me give you an example of how effective praise might work. If I was with you right now, I would pick out one of you to be in a role play, and it would be something like, I can see John's face clearly. I'm using John. I would say something like, John, I want to thank you for listening during this presentation. Made me feel good to know you were listening. All right. Watch the difference between that and this one. John, I want to thank you for listening during this presentation. You nodded your head. You smiled once or twice when I said something I thought was funny. You had really good body posture. Thanks for listening. Made me feel really good to know you were really listening. All right, you can stop listening now, John. That's over. All right, so
Okay.
all right, so did you hear the difference? Same behavior. Thanks for listening. But what if John doesn't know what good listening is? I told him. Eye contact, nodding your head, smiling, body language. All right, so not only did I teach John what effective listening is, I taught all of you who were paying attention to me just now. You catch kids doing things right. In our culture, we only have two options. You can reinforce the positive. You can somehow confront the negative. And I think we've been socialized into confronting the negative. I did a faculty in service for one of our high schools in the Archdiocese of Baltimore. And I asked those teachers, what do you carry with you when you're in class, when you're walking up down the hallways? Detention slips. They're trained to find kids doing something wrong. I worked with that, and they developed what they called affirmation slips. Now they didn't give up their detention slips, but they had a packet they made up called affirmation slips. And on that, if a teacher caught a kid doing something right, the teacher wrote the kid's name, wrote what the kid did, and the kids would collect these blue affirmation slips. And then once a month, the principal had breakfast with all the kids who had blue slips. Just a way of you catch them doing it right. So here's the skill. The skill for doing this, you show approval for the behavior. John, thank you for listening. You identify, this is the key one. You identify behavior specifically. Here's what you did. You give a reason for it. And the reason you do this is you start to identify positive motivation. We do these kinds of things because it impacts other people. That's the beginning of conscience, and it's the beginning of compassion. It takes 5 seconds sometimes to do this. My learning is that you can do it anywhere. Anywhere. You can do it with your own kids. Here's an example from my parish. One of my kids wanted to be a lector at Mass. So she lectures, and after Mass, she comes right up to me. She goes, Bob, how did I do? Imagine what happens if I say to her, and her name was Laura. Laura, really good eye contact. You spoke very clear, but you danced with the podium. So if I say that, dance with the podium, what do you think is the only thing she's going to remember of those 3 things? Dancing with the podium. That idea of but. How many times have you been paid a compliment, and the longer the compliment, you thought the bigger the but? You just thought it was coming. Whether it was in a work setting as part of a performance appraisal, somebody commenting on your class that you may have been teaching or a program that you run, we are conditioned to wait for the critique. Effective praise says avoid the but. Laura, you did really well. Great eye contact. You prepared the reading. Great tone of voice. You landscaped. You looked around at the whole audience. It was easy to listen to you read. And because kids travel in packs, not only did I teach her about effective reading, I taught the other kids with her. If I had said but, all the learning is gone. And in fact, the work at Boys Town in Nebraska, they say our kids are so affirmation starved, they need a 4-to-1 ratio, affirmation to critique. I'm not saying you don't critique. I'm saying you make that a whole separate conversation so that it's not part of this. Think of the number of times you've gone to a fast food place. I think that they're all staffed by young people anymore. There's so many opportunities to use effective praise. I teach at Catholic U, pastoral ministry with young Catholics is called. And I teach the kids this skill, and their homework assignment is to go and use it. Use effective praise on somebody in your dorm, one of your classes, friends, somebody at the cafeteria, doesn't matter. And come back and tell me what it was like. My friends, I'm convinced, if nothing else from here, learn this skill and use it, and it'll become second nature to you. And people, young people, they will notice. Show approval for the behavior, identify the behavior, because that makes it repeatable and that makes it real. Why? Because it's anchored in observable behavior. Effective praise. Now, the second one is to prevent you from having too many headaches. Preventive teaching says this. Let me give you a backward example. How many times have you been teaching a class or running a session or something, and you say to your kids, I need you to behave? How many different definitions of behave do you think are sitting in front of you? One for each kid. How many times in a class have you said, I need you to act appropriately? How many definitions of appropriate do you think? And for those of you who are parents of middle school, high school kids, how many definitions of clean your room do you think exist? Do you get that? That sometimes we say things that no one really knows what it means. Preventive teaching says, describe your specific behavior. Give a reason, have the person acknowledge that they understand, and if you can, practice the behavior. Practice the behavior of effective listening, of paying attention. And then praise them for doing that, effective praise. Here's what it looks like for some of us. I don't think we've ever thought about it, but have you noticed, those of you who've been in this work a long time, have you noticed the rise of codes of conduct? That there was a time we didn't have them because everybody had an agreed upon way of behaving. That era is over. And now we have codes of conduct for retreats, code of conduct for trips, codes of conduct for the National Catholic Youth Conference. I mean, we have codes of conduct now for boards of directors, for the adult conferences. It's like our world is so complex, you can't assume. You will make your life easier. One of my friends is a high school campus minister, and she took this to heart and laid out clearly before one of their school masses how they were supposed to act, when they were supposed to sit, stand, and kneel. And after the mass was over, she said to me, and it was my kids who weren't Catholic who were most appreciative of what I told them because they didn't know what to do. Preventive teaching. And the third one, and I just want to remind you, you don't have to take note. This is on the handout that's on the website. You stop the behavior, appropriate consequence. We could break this open for a while, but I want to let it go. And then here's the thing though, remember this. Negative behaviors need to be replaced with a positive behavior. You can't leave a vacuum. You can't just stop the negative behavior. You have to replace it with something else, or kids will slide back into the negative behavior. That's what that is. Okay, so here's the last thing then. think about developing a life skills training session, all right? You can build this into your existing programs. It could be a standalone, however this works. But think about it. It is best when it's problem-centered. And what that means is a problem that young people are having or they have to deal with. This is when this is most effective. Why? Because it matches their lived reality. Identify what are the components of the skill. This is the challenge part, is to take a behavior and break it down into its observable components. Effective listening includes this, and this. Good program planning includes this, and this. Good lecturing. You get the idea. Identify the components and then practice the components. Add the rationale or the motivation. That's the beginning of conscience. And let the kids practice. And as long as it's related to their lived experiences, it makes sense. It'll just make sense. All right, I just saw that we're getting right up to our time. So John, is this a place where we can open it up to questions in the chat box?
Sure. Otherwise,
Or live? Let me see here. Oh, all right. I'm sorry. I forgot I had an example for you. All right, about listening, but I did talk about this. So you get to see what I was trying to do here for a skill session. All right. What are the component pieces? When's it important? Practice it. When can you use this skill? Now it's real. I'm going to leave that one go for you. I'm going to leave that one go. And the only place I've written about this whole idea of self-esteem, I wrote a book, Happy, Healthy, Holy Teenagers. That's available from NFC Land. So it's an old book, but I happen to think it's really good because I'm really biased. So there we are. All right. So having said that, then, so what are you thinking? If you're close enough to a microphone, you can just unmute. If you want to put a question into a chat box, that's fine too. But how's that strike your lived experiences? This whole idea of moving away from an achievement model and an affirmation model to a competence model, identifying, catching our kids doing things right, teaching the skills to become happy, healthy, holy adults, just like us, skill-based. And we need to teach the skills that our young people are going to need. What are you thinking? How'd that sound to you?
well, certainly thank you, Bob, for sharing all of your insights and all of your reflections and understandings of all this. I mean, personally, I'm thinking to myself, the translation of this, of my ministry with young people of any ages that I'm working with, but then also working with my 4-year-old son and timeouts and
Absolutely
that sort of thing, is that I know you speak the language of youth and young people, young adults, etc., but this is translatable and transferable in any age, I would propose.
and in fact, John, this skill works with adults. I didn't want to say that to you because you're watching me, but it works with adults. This is what good performance appraisal does too. It catches employees doing things right and highlights that. And so this works with your spouses. Now, if you're here with your spouse, sorry, they're going to know what you're doing. But if they're not here, this works it works with adults as well. Why? Because we're affirmation starved. Here's an example from my ministry. People will come up after and say, "Oh, that was a really good workshop." It's really nice to hear. It's not a helpful comment. It's the person who says, "That was a good workshop." And I'll say, "Why was it good? Why was it good for you?" You use stories, you use humor, good contact. Most people like PowerPoint because they're visual learners. You see, that kind of a comment, that's repeatable. Now I know what I need to be doing. So that's why I think that effective phrase thing is such a great skill to hold on to. Practice it, and it'll become second nature for you. It will.
I noticed Leanne unmuted, and then Mary at St. Mark's unmuted. I don't know if any of you folks had specific questions or comments.
I guess we don't.
I'm guessing, yeah.
Guess we don't either.
I hope it makes sense. I mean, this whole idea of shifting our self-esteem, our understanding away from feeling and anchoring it in observable behavior that's repeatable. I think because I think that's where confidence and competence comes from. And then effective praise, preventive teaching, corrective teaching, developing skills courses for our kids, teaching them to dance. Can you imagine doing a course on how to live alone? You know, how to handle finances. My daughter in college at the time, she said, "Dad, how can I be out of money? I still have checks." It's like,
Oh.
I mean, do you get that? I mean, you get the idea that there are skills that we assume everybody has, and I'm going to tell you they don't. And our kids are missing these skills as well. And when we teach them skills, those kids look so confident when they got in line to go express their condolences to my cousin. You could see it. I know what to do. Nobody wants to be embarrassed. Help me know what to do. Help me to know what to do. Give me the skills to be a caring adult. And that was fun. Fun for me.
Very well. Thank you so much, Bob. I'm trying to think of all the myriad of praise and compliments and what made your session so wonderful in my experience here.
You better be specific, or I'm going to say.
Wasn't listening.
I roll my eyes. Yeah. But this will be this will be a good test. Go ahead, John. Use effective praise. Yeah. What would it sound like?
Put my own self on the spot here. Other than, my goodness, it's understanding all of those elements of that when we're talking just specific to the content here, that we're always so focused. I was flashing back to my own high school days myself of flopping biology classes and math classes and everything else in high school, but then yet on the flip side, mom and dad talking to me about, I went to a Jesuit Catholic high school, and just talking about how the formation of character was so much more important than just the grades. Grades we can work on, but what you're learning here is more growth and elements in those pieces. And personally, I was so much relating to that in your presentation of thinking that through. So certainly relatable, and that's the key there, is how we can truly see that in a new way, and that it's not more work, it's the essential work that we're doing.
It is, and I want to compliment you as an audience, as a group. I can now see all of you, and you know what it's like on Zoom calls. You have no idea how you're being received. You really don't. But I'm looking at each of my slides here, and I can see all of you, and I don't see any of you on your phone. And that's a compliment, that all of you are looking at the camera. You're all looking at the screen. You're all looking at me. And that makes it easier to be a presenter. I know you've been in that situation, but I bet you've also been in a situation where you're watching, they're on Zoom, or they're on their phone, or they're watching something else. So I want to thank you. I know this is a hard thing at this time of night, especially via Zoom, but I want to thank you for your active listening to this presentation. So thanks. This was great for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, team.